Hello and welcome. I'm excited for our conversation today about the exhibition Interior Space, a visual exploration of the International Space Station, photographs by Paolo Nespoli and Roland Miller. The artists, Paolo and Roland themselves, will be joined by three faculty from the art department who each bring a unique perspective on the subject. Leah Halloran is associate professor in the studio art program. She's the lead of the painting and drawing area, and in her work and teaching, she investigates the intersections of art and science. Julie Shafer, associate professor in the studio art program, lead of the photo area, who, like Paolo and Roland, invents unconventional methods for producing photographs, for instance, using a U-Haul truck as a giant camera obscura. Justin Walsh is associate professor of art history, who has been active in the field of space archaeology and, among other things, has co-created a database of photography of the ISS to investigate if and how one could speak of such a thing as the formation of space culture. Now, our artists are Roland Miller and Paolo Nespoli. Roland Miller is a Chicago native, studied photography at Utah State University, earning his BFA and MFA degrees. For 14 years, he taught photography at Brevard Community College in Cocoa, Florida, where he was first exposed to many nearby NASA launch sites. He then taught at the College of Lake County in Grace Lake, Illinois, for 6 years before becoming dean of its Communication Arts, Humanities, and Fine Arts Division in 2008. Miller retired from higher education in 2018 to work full-time on his aerospace photography. And last but not least, Paolo Nespoli. He's an Italian astronaut and engineer of the European Space Agency. In 2007, he first traveled into space aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery as a mission specialist. In December 2010, he again traveled into space aboard the Soyuz TMA-20 spacecraft as an expedition flight engineer. Nespoli's third spaceflight was on board Soyuz MS-05, which launched in July 2017. During his 3 space missions, he spent a total of 313 days in space. He received his bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering in 1988 and his master's degree in 1989 in aeronautics and astronautics from Polytech University in New York. So again, welcome everybody. And to begin this conversation, I would like to ask Roland and Paolo to maybe briefly introduce us into how they met each other and how this collaboration came to pass.
Well, I'll go first. Because I kind of got this all started. I had some photography of the old abandoned launch pads out on Cape Canaveral Air Force Station on display in the astronaut crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center. And I got a call from an astronaut named Katie Coleman saying how much she liked the work. It happened to be I was away at a conference and I never did connect with her. And it was literally 15 years later, I met her at a launch and introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, I remember your work." And she said, "You know, it would be really wonderful if you could figure out a way to kind of get your photographic vision and approach to work with the astronauts on the International Space Station." She said she literally challenged me to think about how I could do that. So of course I did, never really thinking it would go anywhere, but I put together a proposal, and Katie liked it, and she said, "You know, the only way you're going to get this to work is if we connect you with an astronaut." She said, "I have the perfect person, Paolo Nespoli, who's going to go up to the station in about, at that point is about 8 or 9 months ahead of time." And she connected me with Paolo, and the rest is history. It was the funniest part is I had this very complex real-time plan to tether a DSLR to a laptop and move through the station, have the astronaut move through the station at my guidance, and in real time have them take pictures. And when Paolo talked to me, he was very polite, and in the most polite way, he said, "You know, we could do all that. That's actually technically possible." But he basically said, "There's no way you're going to get official astronaut time and the resources like the downlinks and the data feeds to do all that." But he said very graciously, "I think it's a really interesting idea, and I'd like to talk more about how we might be able to do it." And he had the suggestion that we just email the images back and forth, which is how it ended up working. And I'm not sure to this day why he really agreed to it on some levels, because it ended up being, I think, a lot more work than he anticipated. But he can address that.
Yeah, Roland is right. But he touched one of the things that a kind of my passions. Since when I was a kid, I did play with photography. I learned the rudimental things about using camera. At that time, I'm old enough that it was all completely mechanical. We built a dark room with a few other guys all together, and we were experimenting, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And then later on, when I went into the army, I had always the camera with me. I even put it on top of my helmet, and I would jump off the plane. And at that time, the camera was very heavy, and the people are looking at me like, one of these days your head is going to fly off your chest because of the parachute. So I was in space with Katie, and there was a very fortunate time because we got to do a lot of things in space, including photography, and we did really help each other. She was playing the flute, so we had a very nice relationship. You stay 6 months with somebody in a small place, you really develop a close relationship. And she always liked the photo and always told me those are special photos, which and then when she introduced me to Roland, I really thought, I was in kind of search. I was searching for something to make this mission special, especially concerning photography, because I knew that was my last mission. Yes, I had 6 months, a long time to be in space, but my experience told me that you are there and the time flies away, and eventually you did not do what you wanted to do. So I wanted to focus this time and have a project that really would make sense. And Roland project was, I would say, absolutely right, because it was challenging enough from a technical point of view, but there was a lot to do with aesthetics, with photography, with a lot of with arts, let's say. And on top of that, he explained to me this concept of space archaeology. I kind of looked at him like, wow, that's heavy stuff. And I thought I would like to really work with that. And that's how we went. So I said, okay. And sure enough, as I explaining in the book, we changed a little bit the concept. We had to work in a different ways than his original idea. And but eventually we ended up connecting all these dots and coming up with something that I believe it's really interesting and fascinating. And so I can say that I did my special personal project in space thanks to Roland and his idea.
If I can maybe follow up on that. First of all, thank you so much for being interested in space archaeology. We need all the support we can get. And I may have other questions for you that relate to that at some further point. But I looking at the photographs in the book and in the exhibition, I got the sense that you were somebody who was already passionate about and excited about photography just on its own and for yourself. What's interesting, when I look at the photographs, and I've looked now at thousands and thousands of photographs taken by crew on the space station, it seems like, well, a lot of what we see that's publicly released is obviously designed to send a message about the positive aspects of spaceflight, to encourage public support of spaceflight, these kinds of things. That's the sort of thing you see on NASA's Flickr page. And then the other pictures that I've seen, which NASA has been sharing with my project, that go beyond the publicly shared ones, it's a lot of documentation of experiments and things like that. So we see, multiple shots of the same experiment from different angles or at different moments, things like that. These photos are really different from both of those kinds of photos. And I wonder if, Paolo, you could talk a little bit about your experience of making photos like this on the space station, what it meant to you to be taking these photos. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, as opposed to the other kinds of photos that, the space agencies were asking you to take pictures of.
Yes, I'm would be really interested in hearing Julie and Leah about their perspective. So I'm going to answer very quickly to this one and give the floor to them and give it back to Marcos, who's trying to guide us through this thing. Yes, NASA really sees you as a technician of the space station. You know, we are the manpower there for carrying out experiments, for maintaining this house laboratory in a way that we can work. And so they teach you how to use the cameras, mostly for documenting technical things. I don't know, something breaks, and then they teach you how to take very close-up pictures. They teach you a little bit the lenses and what to use. You do a PR, a public event, and then they want you to have pictures. Or some of the scientists want a special picture about the experiment or some details. So they actually spend some time in teaching you this. But it's a drop in a bucket, meaning that, you know, you train for 3 years, and you can imagine you don't know anything about photography, and in 2 hours they tell you how to use something complicated as one of the modern machines, which can be easy. You put it on P and that's it. Or if you want something special, it's even more complicated than the manual one, because they have the mind on their own and you need to understand. And so it is true that this was exactly the project that I was looking for, because yeah, I can take pictures of broken bolts or experiments, but that's not exactly what I mean. This is the fulfillment of my official job, but my project was something else. You know, I took a lot of pictures, something like 25,000 pictures in the previous mission of the Earth. But astronauts always take pictures of the Earth, and there are some gorgeous shots from space. I would even say it's easier to take a gorgeous shot from space. You just go there and point the camera and shoot, clink, 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 you know, infinite. And it's either it's sunny or no sunny, or night, or day or night. You know, there's no way in the middle. There are no clouds. It doesn't change. Things don't change. So I was looking for something a little bit more challenging, a little bit more artistic. Not that the pictures of the Earth from space are not artistic. You can take very nice pictures, but I wanted something different than what there is already there. And Roland's idea was exactly in that direction, and that was the interesting part and challenging part for me. What made my day, if I could use that expression.
Justin, just a really quick intersecting question. When you describe the difference between all those thousands of photos that you've seen during your research and the photos that Paolo and Roland made together, how would you describe the difference between those two types of photography?
For me, I think the clear difference, first of all, is that they are very carefully composed. It's clear that Paolo and Roland spent some time discussing what exactly they wanted to photograph and how they wanted the image to look beforehand, whereas I think that that's not probably necessarily true with the go schedule that they have on board. And I think something else that's notable about it is the lack of people in the images. And I think I'm really curious about what that was like for Paolo to think about taking photos with no people of the space station, and thinking about them as art photographs, as opposed to, and documentary photographs as well, of course, but without having human subjects in there.
Well, you know, I would say that most of the people that are taken in space, inside the space station, are either of broken things or you know, special details of experiments or something notable that Houston or the control center asked for, or people showing something. And this is very nice. I mean, it is very nice. But there is no this work of documenting the interior, making sure that you take a picture in a certain way so that, for example, you don't distort any light or any line, making sure that things are square or in a certain way, and no people focus the attention on the structure itself. But the other interesting part is that while there are no people in any of the picture except one in the book, the fact you can see the traces of people around, and you can see all sorts of things. You can read. It's, you know, in my idea, it's like going to the pyramid, and obviously there are no Egyptian around, but and I can look at the squareness of the blocks, how they are put, and all these things. But then I go and look for something special, you know, the scuff marks, the sign that somebody did, or something else, because that tells me a lot about those people. And that was really interesting, and it's even more interesting now, to be honest, because every single time I look at a picture, I mean, I see something that I haven't seen before. There are so many details. There are so many testimony of things that is absolutely amazing. The combination of, as we said, art and science and documentation and what you can take out of it. And of course, we look at this book with the fact that this is being done now, but I wonder what will happen in 200 years. And people will look at a book like that, and that's all they have. And that's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm.
If I could, oh.
You want to go ahead, Julie?
Okay. I just wanted to jump in and say one of the things that struck me kind of right away is sort of imagining whose eyes I was looking through as I was looking at these images. And, you know, it sort of seemed like, on the one hand, because they are all so carefully composed and there's no sort of canted angles, and everything's so perfectly lined up, it almost seems like that we are grounded, right? Or like we're, you know, that gravity is like, you know, not playing a factor, because it's just, I felt like I was solid on a ground looking at everything. And so that was a really interesting sort of experience to have, and it allowed me to then just, I mean, the images are very, it's like claustrophobic or so. There's like so much information in them. And, but because the colors are somewhat monotone, I really was able to go in and take a look at a lot of the details. And the first one that kind of struck me is, for some reason, humorous. It was one that said coffee with milk and then tea with milk. It was like where the food was. And it's like, this white package has coffee with milk in it. Like it was really, it made it human. Right. And then I noticed all these patches and the stickers, and I felt a little bit like I happened upon this ship that's not really recognizable, and it was like all this evidence, and I was trying to piece together sort of like what is going on here, who was here, what do all these signs mean, and so it felt very foreign to me, even though I knew what I was looking at. And so that was interesting. And there was one in particular that really stood out to me, and I was hoping you could maybe illuminate a little bit more about this. It's one of, you can see the reflection of the camera in one of the space suits in the helmet. And but the lettering and all the language on the suit is backwards. And so I thought initially, like, oh, did they mirror this in Photoshop and it, you know, like a mistake? And I was like, no, there's no way this is a mistake, because then the lettering on the wall is correctly oriented. So it made me think, like, is it something because with these suits you are, when outside you only see a reflection, and that's the easiest way to control something on the spacesuit when out on a mission? I don't know, it made me really wonder about being in there and the experience of like this backwards lettering making sense during the action. So maybe you could help illuminate that a little bit.
Well, Julie, I would like to pick up on what you said at the beginning, which was, to me, very interesting, made me think a lot. You said you wanted to know whose eyes you were looking through, looking at these pictures now. So forgive my English here. I'm mangling a little bit your language, but understand. I feel you understand what I'm saying, because it's very interesting. And I thought somehow the composition. I mean, this is Roland. This is Roland that decided I want this composition, and Roland, help me if it's not a, but somehow, and this was the deal that we make at the beginning, that I would be the one taking the pictures, and there are certain things that I added in there, or I made sure they could be visible, or clean up the stuff, because for every picture I had to clean up the lights and everything. So it's very interesting. It's like Roland. It's the script writer, and I am the photography. I don't know, that takes the pictures and makes the what is it called, the script into something that is now usable. So whose eyes are dead? I think it's Roland for sure, mine for sure, and I think the result is very, very, very interesting. Now, answering quickly about the suits and the lettering backwards, is that when you are inside a suit, you cannot move your head like this. You have a helmet, and so you can barely, especially somebody with a head pretty big like mine, you can barely move in there in that helmet. So you're not able to see those dials. So they flip the thing, because you have a little mirror. If you there is a little mirror here on the cuff, and you can actually use the mirror to look what is there, and the other hand the mirror. It's a little bit like, have you seen in the ambulance, sometimes it says ambulance backward, and you're thinking, why?
Yeah.
Because when you're driving, you can see ambulance right, and that's more or less the same concept.
Fantastic. Okay, makes total sense.
Let me add a couple things there. When we did this, the way it worked, my initial plan was to photograph some of the mock-ups and use that photography to direct Paolo. And it turns out the mock-ups are very low fidelity. But while I was actually photographing the mock-ups, I was informed that Google and NASA were releasing a street view of the interior of the space station. So I thought, oh, that'd be great. Then I quickly realized not only would I be able to see what it looked like, and the good thing was they filmed that street view just a few months before Paolo went up, because they're always moving things around on the station. But I'd also be able to do screen captures and send those to Paolo. So I would move through the Google Earth Street View of the ISS, do screen captures, send those to Paolo. We had a whole spreadsheet eventually, and there were some notes and stuff. But one of the interesting things about this particular photograph was, I should have been thinking far ahead and said, hey, make sure when you take the one of the helmet with reflection, you get out of the way. I didn't think to do that, but when I got it, I'm like, wow, he had to actually go way into the next compartment, the next module, set it on a timer, which I believe is what you did. Am I correct, Paolo? Because otherwise you'd have been in the photograph.
Yes.
And that's an example of just some of the advanced skills that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think of, or at least you had to plan that out to put it on a couple of arms and put it on a timer and get out of the way. So.
Well, speaking of that helmet shot too, it also illuminated the armature that you had to use. This this tripod that was, sort of moving and that moment right there made me realize how difficult each of these shots was to take. It wasn't just, like you said, put it on program, push the button, because I imagine they're long exposures and you're moving. I have no idea how a camera moves in one of those, but I'm sure there's some movement. And so having that, it's not a typical tripod that you have in there. I thought that was really great to see. Just how difficult each of these shots would have been to take. I'm sorry, Leah, I just have a very quick question, because I know it looks like there's one photo where there's a window open. Is that at all can you have a window open in space? You can't do that, right?
I mean, no. I mean, if you think a window physically open so that there is an exchange between the outside and inside, that's not possible, because it would lose almost instantaneously all the air inside the station, which creates a little bit of problems. So it's
a little bit. No. Okay, that's what I thought, and I stared for a long time at one image. It looks like there's this little tiny window open, but I'm misreading it, I'm sure.
Well, what struck me was kind of to Julie, your earlier point of who is taking the photo, but looking at all the images, it made me really question just the notion of documentation, because you know, even your comment about being able to, it's easy to take a picture of Earth. I can see how that's easy because it's so novel, right? It's almost like everyone, even if you don't physically want to go to space, you'll be fascinated to just see a selfie of what we look like. So then that sort of makes me think about what is the nature of documentation and the history of that. And I was reminded of Fenton's famous photo of the Valley of Death that has all the cannonballs, right? And it then turned out that he took 2 of them. Were the cannonballs there first? Was the valley empty? And even when we started, Paolo, I think this is documented really well when you were like, oh, I better move my son's binoculars. And on top of that, sharing that you actually are trained as astronauts on how to take pictures of the space. So it's really that they're sort of presented as documentation, but you understand that there's an underlying current of curation. And yet, to your example about the Egyptian tombs, you sort of walk through these as if you are just there to extrapolate the clues, and maybe it's clues about your own experience, about what it would be like. Because I think that these are they're really like an invitation to an experience that we will not have. You know, I think that it's pretty clear that, like, maybe my 2-year-old daughter will get to go to space someday, but I feel like Justin, Julie, we're probably not.
It's over. Yeah.
You know, and therefore you're this invitation to that experience and that notion of documentation then is so profound. And whether or not, and that's what calls my interest, is the neutrality of that. You know, how many things were moved out of the space? How many things were curated? Or is this like a genuine snapshot? Or are you moving the binoculars and the, you know, discarded food that's floating around, or somebody's, you know, workstation that is too messy? And I think that like, it's like an opening to a lived experience, but I like that it sort of, it always kind of keeps you on the boundary of wondering what that documentation is.
Well, you know, when I had the idea to do this, or when Katie spurred me to do this, I thought, well, what can I do that's different, that's not being done? There's no point. Like, I would have loved to have done a project simply photographing the Earth from the cupola, because the images are just amazing. But the reality is, the images that the astronauts are already taking are beautiful. There's no need to do that again. And so I started thinking about what would be different, and that's when this came up. And I've been working in this kind of documentary abstract mode. These are a bit less abstract than some things, going back to my work of the abandoned launch pads. And you know, you do have to make those decisions. Like, what do I move? Like, there's a wire hanging down. Am I destroying the historical nature of this if I pull that wire out of the way? You know, I'm making a much better picture. It's much more interesting. Does that wire really matter? So, you know, it's like anything else. If you study history, history's fluid. I probably took some liberties, you know, like even Paolo kind of cleaning up before we did this. There's actually some reason for that, because NASA has a lot of rules about where things can be, and people can get, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, if a cable's running to the wrong place or through a hatch or something, people can get in trouble. So we didn't want to cause a stir. But but I think it does. My goal with this, we did a couple things that were unique. We used available light, except for when Paolo was photographing anything that included the earth outside, like in the cupola. We used a flash so you could balance the lighting outside and inside. But the rest of the interior stuff, for the most part, I believe, is all available light, which is in a weightless environment in relatively low light, technically very difficult.
Yes.
But when you look at most pictures from the space station, typically with an on-camera flash, everything up front looks fine, and then as you go farther back, it gets darker and darker and darker. I wanted people to see what would it look like if I was just there, sitting there or floating there, and I could look down through the different modules.
So can I ask a follow-up question on that with to your example of the wire? Can you talk a little bit about what was done in post? Was there ever a moment where you had to remove something, let's say based on security or confidentiality from NASA, or this doesn't look good, let's remove the wire?
Well, I did quite a bit of post-production on this work because the lighting was difficult. So things, anything right by the lights was blown out in a lot of cases, so I had to bring that down. I tried not to. I did a lot of touch up on some text that was blurred. I would actually recreate text, but I would figure out the font and the kerning and the angle. So no one would know the difference. And I thought, at the end of the day, to me, at the top of the list, this is art. So I'm okay with that. I wanted to do that, but I tried not to distort or change the meaning of anything or somehow, bias these images in any way that wasn't true to their original nature. There was one thing that I found. There was a guy named Mark Whitney, and his phone number is listed up there. And I thought, and I'm surprised they didn't, flag that somehow, because I didn't want people calling this poor guy on his work phone at NASA, wherever I'm sure. So I changed the phone number. I changed the prefix and blurred out the other numbers. They still look like numbers, but you really can't tell what it says. And I was very tempted to change his name to Mark Watney, but I thought that would be from The Martian. That was the guy. But I didn't. That would have been going too far. That would have been.
Yeah, Roland, you left my bank account there. Very visible.
Oh, I did. I kept that for myself.
Just a joke. No,
I know. I needed your PIN number though, so you didn't leave that.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, Leah, that's a very interesting point, because people have a strange idea of the space station. I think in a certain way, even NASA tend to treat the space station like I would say, what is it called? A surgery room. So a place very clean, where nothing that is not absolutely necessary is in there. You just go there with your gloves, mask and everything. You do what you need to do, and then you go home, somebody comes and clean, and it's perfect. 20 years later, it's perfect as it is. That's how it's supposed to be. The fact is that you are actually living in this laboratory, and there is nothing much built for living. It's not that you can go out, close the room, and now I'm going to the other room. You still live in your surgery room, and you work. And not only that, you just don't do only surgery. You do 50 different types of experiments. You can do metallurgy, followed by working with a mouse, and then blowing up or opening up a fan, and all sorts of crazy things like that. So you need a gazillion of different tools. You need a gazillion of spare parts. You need to have your food there for at least 3 or 4 months, your clothing, your toothpaste, your everything. So there is a lot of stuff in there. And it's very, very complicated to keep it in order, because 6 people are moving around on the 12 hours of duty day. You are doing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 15 different things. And so I wanted to take these pictures, no people in there, and I needed quiet and calmness. So I had to wait for everybody going to bed so I can have the operating theater for myself. start playing with the lights, and Roland is absolutely right. The lights are very bright. I tried to play so that to do as much as I could. Then I had to fix the camera. Then I have to look for everything. So it took, as I'm explaining in the book, it took, an hour, if not two, for each one of the shots before I could do it. I thought at the beginning, oh yeah, Roland wants some picture, 3 minutes per picture, a few hours and I'm done. And sure enough, but with time I realized that it's not exactly like that. And so, for example, if you see some of the pictures, I show some of these pictures, those pictures where you see the whole U.S. laboratory, and people look at it and it feels not orderly. Cables all over the place, it's hanging all over the place, it's things here, things there, it's full, jam-packed of stuff. Well, this is after I cleaned it a little bit, because I did clean it a little bit. I had to take away a few things that were proprietary or that were confidential. I forgot Mark phone number up there, but there were stuff in there because it's a working place. So, but I usually tied up stuff a little bit. There is one pictures, by the way, where I think I've exaggerated in tidying up, and is what we call the control post of the US lab, which is the place where we usually talk to Houston. We have pen, pencil, all sorts of things, and they're all usually scattered around all over the place. And I kind of spent 45 minutes cleaning up all the things, and it looks like this was done by, what is it called, the guys that are obsessive compulsive disorder and OCDs guys, because they were all like, that's not the normal station. It's a little bit more confused, but in a certain way, except maybe for that picture, the rest, it's pretty much what you would find when somebody starts working, or let's say at the beginning of the day, or let's say Monday morning, when during the weekend you have tied up and clean up everything. Then Friday is slightly different, but Monday morning, that's how it is. So it's original in a certain way. It's tied up, but not OCD.
The real question is, who is calling Mark from space? Why is that up there?
Well, because we do need to talk to people sometime, flight directors, because when you call over the radio, everybody down on the ground stops working, listening to what you're doing, what you're saying. And sometimes you need to have more time to discuss few things. And so there are few people that we actually call directly, and we agreed on something, or we defined certain things, and Mark was one of them.
And is it actual phone number?
Yeah, and his name's actually Greg Whitney. I got it wrong, but yeah, it was
Greg. Yeah, it's I think it's one of the flight directors, by the way.
So I went through the pictures in great detail to make sure there was nothing else, because we didn't want to cause anybody any harm, certainly doing this. But, and I'll say too, I didn't know Paolo was going to clean things up, but I thought it was, part of this, it was a collaboration, and I wanted him to, have his part in it. And, I would send him those sample images, but he had to make the final decisions on the compositions. And, it's all, to me, it's all in the details. It's in the edges of the photographs. It's in the little things that I can't really see sometimes in the Google Street View. So that I was very pleased with how the collaborative part of it worked out.
So I don't want to, sorry, Julie. I don't want to belabor the archaeological point, but it's come up several times now, because Paolo was talking about the pyramids and how you look at the details of how the stones of the pyramids are cut, and that's how you learn about the people from the past. And that's exactly, Paolo, I think you've got a second career. If retirement isn't working out, you've got a potential second career as an archaeologist, if that's what you're doing when you look at the pyramids. And Julie as well, talking about the way things change over time, and Leah about the documentation. All of that is exactly the kinds of things that we're interested in. And it reminded me of something that I discussed with Roland as we were looking at the photos when he was first starting to process them, and I was talking to him about some of the work that we were doing on the ISS archaeological project, and he sent me a couple of photos of the Columbus European Laboratory hatch. And I noticed a difference from one to another. First of all, I noticed that there's a piece by the street artist Invader up there, which I think Samantha Cristoforetti placed up there as part of there was some sort of collaboration between the European Space Agency and Invader. And so there's one of his artworks up there now on the hatch, on the inside of the hatch of Columbus. And Paolo, you had taken one of those photos. And then in another photo, I noticed that next to it was a geocaching tag that hadn't been there before. Did you put that there?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, in fact, this was one of the points that I was going to mention, is that, interesting enough, looking at the pictures between some pictures that I took at the beginning and some pictures that I took 6 months later, you see already a change in there. So it's a little bit more like, the Egyptian, the dynasty of this pharaohs, and the other one, they are different. So yes, I did put up that geocaching thing. It was interesting. There's also a medal that I put up and another patch. So that there are changes there, here and there are.
This is exactly what we're interested in documenting, is that change over time, right? And how do people make this space their own? What are the ways in which that they're arranging the space, they're arranging items in the space, and all of that. And so this is one of the things that I think that the photographs are so exciting for, in addition to their artistic qualities.
You know, Justin, one of the ways that this ties up with the picture, with the question before about cleaning up the station. There is a picture of the Columbus laboratory, and for some reason, this was my OCD, independently from the pictures. You know, we use this bungee cords to keep things against the wall, and you put them, and after a while, they become an incredible, complex, and convoluted cobweb that it's all, and for some reason I spent so much time in squaring them. In fact, if you look at a picture of Columbus at the back, which was my module, European module, so that there was the king, I had it all square like this. But now there is a picture of Note 3, which was a general area, and when I was there taking the picture, I had the choice of spending 2 hours in fixing the bungees or taking it as it is. And I had no 2 hours to spend there, so I took it as it is. So here, even there, you can see the differences between the different astronauts, or what happened when you use something, how things transform from square and parallel to more live wise.
Yeah, I think this is we spend a lot of time organizing things and keeping them in a particular place. And the documentation that you created of this, you really see, this is also something that Roland and I spoke about in the walkthrough, right, Roland? You were talking about the photo where you see the toy space shuttle up in one corner, and then next to it were the cables, right? You want to
Yeah. Well, Paolo told me this, but they use plastic bags, literally like Ziploc bags, to store cables in, because if you just put a strap around them, they just spread all out and get everywhere. It's but I like that photograph because it's just so random. There's an eye chart up there and a patch and that model, and it just kind of shows you, and it's fun. That's actually a really interesting corner. Every time I see that photograph, things are moved around. That eye chart's in slightly different position because I think it gets used all the time. But so that's one of the reasons I like that area, because it seems to be constantly in flux.
One thing I'd like to hear is, which are your favorite photos, both you and Roland, Paolo? Which photos do you like the most of the ones that are in the book and in the exhibition?
Well, as I always say, it's like picking your favorite child, but obviously the cover photograph, that cupola with clouds and ocean image, when I opened up that file, I was just shocked, because I'd sent Paolo a picture from Google Earth, and you can still see the one I sent him. It's still on Google Earth. And it's nice, it's a pretty little land and sea, but when I opened that up and I saw that pattern of clouds, I'd like to tell you that I spent several months studying weather patterns over the Pacific and looking at different cloud patterns, and determined that this time of year would be perfect. But in reality, I said to Paolo, did you wait, in the cupola to get that picture? He said, oh no, you got to get in there and get your stuff done and get out, because it's always somebody waiting to get in. And so those just happened to be the clouds that were there when he made those pictures, and I think it's spectacular. I like the image of it's of node 1, but you can see into PMA 1 and into node 3 that it really gives you a feel of the space. It's wide angle, but I think you see the space in a way that you don't normally, in dimensionality to it. I like some of the details of the operations desk that they have there with the it's just the way it's laid out and things. And yeah, I guess those would be some of my favorite ones. Paolo?
Well, it's I would have as you a hard time to really pick the favorite or the favorites. I think the one with the spacesuits, the EVA spacesuits, are somehow, as Julie said, a little bit spooky, but very interesting in a certain way. I like the view. Some of those, when there is the whole module and you can see the mess around. In a certain way, the picture where I am in, it's interesting because you can actually see that where I'm pointing the camera, it's fairly clean. But look at my back in that picture, and you will see the mess of cables and everything. That shows you a little bit how station it is. And the last thing one thing that I wanted to mention, by the way, is that when the editor started putting together the pictures in the book, they kind of use gravity as a vector. They always try to put the pictures in a way that it's vertical and you can read the things. But I was looking at the book and I said, look, we have a page that is rectangular. If you take the picture and turn it around, it will take the whole page. But if you put it vertical, it will take just a little bit. Why? It's so nice. And I think that was an important part that I had to kind of push and say, okay, we are in space. There is no verticality. Put the picture in the book so that you get the max out of it. You can always take the book and flip it around, which is what we do in space. If something doesn't work with your feet towards what you think is the floor, who cares? Put it somewhere else, and you forget quickly and immediately which part it is, which also drives me nuts, also the book, because the front and the back are absolutely identical. That's another one that flips your mind. And that's a little bit, again, the play that gravity gives you in space. That's also very interesting.
I like that you said that Julie pointed out the suit has like a haunted feel. There's another one, I think it's called Quest Airlock, and it's two suits facing each other, but what's haunting about it is it's almost like there's a piece of gauze that's protecting the neck piece, and it absolutely has that sort of strange Halloween porch stuffed person. And I think that when you're looking through these, if we agree that we are sort of archaeologists, right? Like being able to go through this and sort of piece together the people that are not, those ones, it really it like brings to it this sort of haunted space, that it is not your space and where is everyone. And so those ones to me, like they impacted me the strongest, is those two images, and especially the one of the two sort of stuffed suits looking at each other. It took me a long time to want to move to the next photo. It was like there's some sort of friction between them. It wasn't just the subject, but the figuration of them was really exciting.
One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about as we've been talking here is the frame, which the photographic frame, I think, is the most powerful tool that you have, because it's really it's how you decide what goes in and what is eliminated. And, you know, we've been talking a bit about removing things literally from in front of the camera, but this is also like where you can remove things that you can't physically move, right? And but it struck me that the space in which Paolo, you're photographing in, you can't, like, your frame is sort of dictated by the space, and that's a little bit unusual. You know, usually your body is free to move just about anywhere you want to frame something, but it's like you could only move back so far, right, to get something in. And so that's a really interesting dynamic that isn't typical with photography, right? You know, Roland, as you know, like, you can move as close or far away typically from a subject. So it's this way that the space station is dictating some of the terms of how you could photograph. And then another thing, like, I give an assignment in class called straightforward photography, where you are meant to take everything sort of deadpan, no unusual angles. It's meant to be from a human's perspective and with a deep depth of field. All right, so everything's sharp, you can see everything. And the whole purpose of it is so that he is distracting me, so that this is Apollo, by the way.
Oh,
and
I was just going to say, you have to give the dog's name.
Yeah, this is Apollo, and if I didn't have him sitting here, you'd just hear him barking incessantly in the background. So by photographing everything in a straightforward manner with a deep depth of field, it's meant to make a viewer feel as though they understand what this space is like, even if they've never been there before, right? And that every single detail, exactly as is what matters. You know, the world as it is already interesting enough. So let's exploit all the controls of this camera to really, like, highlight that. So that's the method that I saw Roland was, I'm assuming, dictating to use. But what's so great here is, yeah, I can see everything. Everything's straightforward. There's no tricks of, like, shallow depth of field and weird angles, but I still have I'm totally foreign in this space. And that is one of the most compelling things. I can see it all, but I don't understand it all. And so in that way, I guess it's, Justin, as you pointed out, it's like we're archaeologists going through, like, what is this clue left behind? Whose signatures are these on this space shuttle? Like, it had me
make sense of this thing that we're looking at, right?
Exactly. Like, what do these patches mean? Like, what is this symbol? What organization is this? Like, and it reminded me of, is it called the Golden Record? The record that was put on Apollo. Like, I love the idea behind it, but it's also totally kind of absurd that anyone would know. I don't know, if some other life form found this, that they would know to even play it, or, like, what the sounds would be, that it would be a similar thing of, like, what is this? You know, and, like, what do I do with it?
On how to use it on the record itself. It gives directions about where we are and how to use it.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
But even understanding,
yes.
like, or like, they would even understand how to do that. But anyway.
Yeah, there is an interesting thing that I just, but talking, Julie, came in my mind, is that, if I go to Cairo and look at the pyramids, I have to sort out what is there because was put there and what is there because accidentally got there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's not the case for the space station. I mean, every single little thing that is there has a reason. Otherwise, it would not be there. Because it cannot be there. It's not that it's raining or there is a flood or something. If you take something from the ground and you bring it up there, it has a reason. There is a story behind. And this is what maybe Justin can.
So you made me think, because we've just submitted an article for publication, and hopefully it'll be accepted soon. We don't know yet, but we were looking at instances of visual display on the space station. And there's a couple of them. One of them, probably, Paolo, you're extremely familiar with. In the Russian Zvezda module, you've got all of the icons and the gold cross and the images of Soviet space heroes. And that's one aspect of visual display on the space station. In Node 1, which is an American module, on the hatch leading into the airlock, you've got a makeshift memorial for astronauts who have passed away. And then on the Columbus hatch, the European module, you have a different kind of visual display. It's not about, mourning people who are lost, but it's like the stickers of the mission patches in Node 1, which is another visual display. You also have your mission, the individual European crew mission stickers, and then other items like a UNICEF sticker and the invader artwork and the geocaching tag. You have those things. So those are put in locations that happen to be free. They were not intended by NASA or ESA or Roscosmos to be used for that function. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you were capturing those improvised aspects of life in space. What do you think about that?
And can I add, even talk a little more about the domesticity of space on that? Because like what you're saying is like like mediated, but just as you pointed out, like you have 9 people who've got to live there. So I'm also curious, as an extension of that, just talk about the domesticity aspect of it.
Well, each of us, when he gets on the space station, gets assigned what is called a crew quarter, which is a kind of there is a picture on the book, by the way, a kind of a private place about the size of an old telephone booth. You are supposed to put your stuff in there, and you can make it whatever you want. You can put a picture of your dog, of your mother-in-law, or whatever you want. You can put it there, and then you are supposed, when you're done, to take down everything and either bring it back to Earth or destroy it. So in principle, originally, we were not supposed to leave anything in there. But there are certain things that are kind of common culture. And for example, the makeshift memorial that you were mentioning, that is put in a place that theoretically is not supposed to be photographed. Now, you can barely see a little bit in some of the pictures. I guess maybe this would be one of the pictures that NASA would have restricted. And instead, in the Columbus module, some of those things are kind of semi-official, some are not. Now it's customary, for example, that every crew puts its own patch of its own mission and sign it. And in fact, if you look at the picture from Node 1 looking into Node 3, there is a slew of patches all over the place, because that's 250 people have been on board the station, and so each one brought up his own patch and his own things, and so I think there is a kind of a norm there, meaning that something that is really only personal should not go there, or should not stay there permanently. I might bring up in space a picture of, I don't know, my daughter or my son or something. I will bring it up, have it there, take a picture, maybe go to the cupola and take a picture of that picture with the Earth and the background, and then I will bring it back. And those are kind of mementos that we bring back and give to the person, to the organization, to, we bring, for example, some jersey or your preferred soccer team or a football team or a baseball team, and then you bring it back. You don't leave it around, because literally, can you imagine what happened if everybody would leave things in there? I mean, it's already exploding, by the way, the station, with the things that need to be there. And so these little mementos are carefully placed in place where there is no impact from a technical point of view, and where are displayed because they represent something for an organization or for the team or for something. There is very little that has to do with a personal thing. It's almost, there is nothing. if I would be there and I see something that is personal from a specific astronaut personal, probably would remove it sooner or later.
I have a question for Roland and Paolo. How would you, did you have a set time that you would, like, would you guys talk to one another, or was everything emailed back and forth, or how would you communicate while one of you is on the space station and one of you is here on Earth?
So we would email, for the most part. I would send those screen captures and it would have been, actually would have been nice. That didn't really come out till right before he went on up to space on that mission. So I would email him the screen captures, and I started out, and I first was like overly aggressive, like, let's document this whole module first. And then it turned out we were taking pictures that weren't as interesting, and the time was so critical, we kind of scrapped that and just said, let's make a list of all the most important pictures, and I prioritized them on a spreadsheet, and then Paolo attacked that. And there would be, with the Google Street View, you can only stop in certain spots, you can't go up and down, you can swing back and forth and up and down. So I would, in some cases, add notes and say, all right, I want this shot, but angle it this way, and whatever it might be. And Paolo did call me once. We had a breakdown in getting not our communication, but in getting me the photographs, because they had to go to NASA and have them go to the astronaut office and clear, like just what Paolo said, any personal things, and then they would send them to the Italian Space Agency, and then they would get them to me. And for about 2 weeks, I wasn't getting any. So Paolo called me, and he had emailed and said, do you think we should talk? And I didn't think we really needed to talk, but personal me is going, I got to figure out some excuse so I can get a call from the space station.
Yeah.
So about an hour later, he just calls me out of the blue, and I was so shocked. And I need to preface this by saying I have a dog named Rocket. And Rocket's an anxious little rescue dog, and any sudden movements, he just goes crazy. So when Paolo called me, I jumped up, and Rocket started barking. And so I'm on my phone with an astronaut on the space station yelling, no Rocket, no Rocket, no Rocket. But we were able to work out the problem. It turned out it was somebody who was on vacation. Anyway, it worked out. But the emailing worked pretty well. It was a very simple way to do it, and much less taxing on the resources of the space station and NASA. I don't know if you have anything to add, Paolo, but.
Yeah, that was the key there. If it would have been an official project for NASA, things would have been completely different, because any communication going about this project from space to the ground had to go through the control center, if that would have been the case. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we do have problems, because I have a problem with an experiment. I cannot talk to the experimenter. I have to talk to the control center. Then there is an interpretation. And by the time it gets back to me, I'm like, huh? That's not what I asked, or this is not the case. But fortunately enough, while we had an official authorization to proceed with this project, it was all to be done outside official duty time and my spare time. And that gave us the freedom to actually, not being obliged to obey some of these rules. And therefore, for example, we would exchange information, or try to exchange information via email. And then there is a phone on the space station, actually. It's one of the things that is put there to kind of break a little bit the isolation and confinement that you are up there. And strangely enough, everybody thinks that the astronauts feel alone up there, but can you think about the families on the ground? I still remember, me being in space and calling my wife and feeling this sense of problem things, because there was a hurricane getting close to Houston, and they had to evacuate. Where am I? In space, being the great astronaut, carrying out great experiments. and they are there trying to figure out what to do, if to evacuate, not evacuate, how to evacuate, where to go. There is no more gas, you know, things like this. So there is this phone, and so I was trying, you know, not to abuse of it, because, you know, it's one of the things that is given to you, and, you know, somebody does something strange, it can be taken away. But eventually, you know, first of all, I just wanted to talk to Roland, to say hello to him. And second, you know, we took the opportunity to talk a little bit about this thing. It's true that, you know, I went to space, and I started the first stage meticulously going through this specification and a storyboard, but then realizing that, you know, I thought by the first 2 weeks I would have done, and there I am with only a few pictures done. And then things happened one after the other. So there were several months when I did not do anything. And I even felt guilty in a certain way, because somehow I was thinking, Roland was on the ground expecting these pictures, nothing was coming. Why is not coming? Paolo's not taking pictures, or there is some problems, or, you know, the system suddenly decided that this project is too crazy, we are not doing it. And that's also was one of the reasons why I elected to pick up the phone and talk to him, so I could reassure him that, you know, you're not seeing anything, but I think I'm doing something, and this is my plan to come up with something that we can use later.
I have a question, or two questions maybe, one for Roland and one for Paolo. The show is called Interior Space, and in that it reminds me of, and I talked about this with Roland, it reminds me of Peter Zanredam, who is a Dutch Baroque painter of church interiors. And he for some of his compositions, put the vantage point outside the churches in order to find a more perfect composition, something that we've already established you weren't able to do. You were confined by the spacecraft itself, so that wasn't an option. But something that links both of your work with Peter Zanredam's work is that he's credited with being the first one to actually portray a piece of architecture. He also purged any people from the churches that he portrayed, and even though there had been paintings of church interiors, they were always portraying some kind of scene. They weren't solely focusing on the architecture. So I think in that you have a link there, and so we've already established early on the linkage of bringing an aestheticized way of composing a photograph into space. So earlier I thought of still life, that kind of aesthetic of the natura morte put into space. Also, when Roland and I installed, we talked a bit about modernism, and Roland, you talked about Mondrian in particular, that for some of the compositions you were inspired by abstract art. So my question for you, and then I have a question for Paolo, is how do you translate that modernist vision, that with all of what it comes with, into this new situation of the space station, which is in some ways, in a lot of ways, in many ways, the total fulfillment of the modernist promise and technology and furthering exploration and novelty. So do you have any thoughts on how does this abstract language, how does that fare with the space subject and the spacecraft subject?
You know, that's a very good question, which I'm not sure I can put into words. I got going on this by photographing the abandoned launch pad starting at Cape Canaveral, and then test sites and other things all around the country. And like Julie, I had an assignment for my students. It wasn't quite like hers, but I would make them photograph a subject in a documentary style and in an abstract style, but they had to photograph the same exact subject. So they had to approach the same subject from two different, both literally and figuratively, vantage points. And that was one of the most exciting assignments for students, because it forced them to look at things in a different way than most of them had ever done. And that's what, when this when I was first exposed to the old launch pads on Cape Canaveral, that was kind of what I looked to. How can I do this in a way, because it's, without sounding too grandiose, it seemed like a great responsibility, because those launch pads were dissolving away, and I knew they weren't going to be there for long, and no one was really paying them much attention. And so I felt like somebody had to do this, and they had to do it quick, and or maybe not quick, but soon. And I also had to avoid what Jeff Nesbitt, who's an architect that wrote an essay for the book, refers to as patina porn, where you're just making nice compositions of rust and colors, which is okay. And to be honest, you'll certainly see that in those photographs. And so one of the things about this kind of overall grouping of bodies of work I like is that it works on a bunch of different levels. It is documenting history. It is hopefully visually beautiful. I was drawn to photography because I thought it was a beautiful, you could show beauty with it. It delves into archaeology and history. I was listening to Justin talk, because when I would go to these old pads or photographing the space shuttle, whatever I'd done, I generally don't know a lot of times, at least the details of the things I'm photographing. So I am also an explorer in that level. In this body of work, it was very different because it wasn't abandoned. It was active and pretty much kind of hopefully in the middle or maybe an earlier part of its lifespan. And so, but I wanted to use that same approach of documentary and abstract. And so that's one of the reasons the compositions are so formal, because I thought it's a very scientific, formal thing. I wanted to carry that through. These are not on the surface as abstract as a lot of my other work. But it was interesting when we put the show up and the way you arranged the images and grouped the images, I felt like I kind of got it. Oh, there's where it is. There's the abstract quality to it somehow. That grouping the way you did really kind of brought that out in a way that, you get so close to these things, sometimes you don't see it, and then someone else helps you see it. I'm forever having people point out things in my photographs that I didn't see. I like to think I saw them subconsciously, but who knows? So, I'm not sure if I'm completely answering that question, but there's an abstract quality to these photographs that are really very straightforward on some level as well. And so it's pushing that nexus of art and science has always been fun to me, and hopefully that's coming through in the images.
Yeah, thank you. And my question for Paolo, taking these photos, these highly formalized photos that you've already described, sometimes took you 90 minutes or 3 hours to get ready to take a shot. Has that meditation on the vessel that you were actually inhabiting for so long, has that changed your idea about it? Did those photographs, when you look at them, do they represent being in space, or do they transcend that in some way due to their formal nature? I guess it's a two-pronged question already. I'm bad with straight questions, but so did it change your view, and do you feel it's an accurate representation, or is it transcending your
well, Marcus, that's a complicated question for an engineer, to tell you the truth. Maybe we should ask this question to Leah or something, or to Giulio, to Roland. As an engineer, when I took those pictures, I was more focused on getting a result. Now that I look at them, I perceive something different, and I see things that I did not see when I took the pictures, or maybe because again they was done on the instruction of Roland, and he had his own way to look at them. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, to be honest. I mean, it's interesting that I look at these pictures and I immediately find something very familiar. It's like you find your house that you lived in for 20 years, and now the house is not there anymore, or you're not in that house, and you remember things. And I remember, situations, or I look at a certain thing and I'm kind of like, oh my God, that thing drove me nuts for 2 weeks. So it makes me feel something, and I feel because I've been there and lived in there. So it's probably completely different than people that just see the pictures and don't have a physical or personal or emotional attachment to these pictures. So in a certain way, they transcend the picture itself. I mean, they are able to somehow take me in space again and make me smile and make me think and remember things. On the other hand, I still see new things. That's also very interesting. That when I stop, looking at the overall pictures and I start looking at the details, it's very, very interesting that I start reverting back to that technical look at. And I remember, I look at that specific tool, that specific computer, that specific way, why this is locked in a certain way and not in the other way. What is a certain thing for, and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. We need to talk a little bit more about it. This is the moment where I say that it's a pity that we send engineers, physicists, doctors in space, and we make them do science. I mean, it's not a pity that we do science, but it's a pity that other people with different background, with different way of interpreting things, with different way of seeing things, are not as yet, I say as yet because it will be in the future, up there. And I can only imagine what would have Roland done, or what would have, Julia, Leah, or even Justin, or even you, Marcus, up there. Because each one of you has an interpretation of that space in a different way. And you are adding things that we as technical astronauts, we are not able to add. It's a little bit like, we were fortunate, or maybe not, but it was interesting. We had a video call with the Pope, which, is dear to Catholics, the Pope in Rome. But anyhow, it's a figure that it's not a technical guy, it's more spiritual guy. And we start discussing, and he was asking about God and the feeling of life and other things. And I was trying to keep up with him, and I was kind of telling him, hey, Francis, I'm just an engineer, why don't you come up here? Why don't you come up here and you experiment this yourself, and you tell me if you feel God more or differently here? And that will be the same. Why don't you guys come up there? And I'm looking forward to the time when we will have all this philosopher, photographer, filmographer, dancer, musicists, writers, people that would just go there and write poems looking down at the earth. I think only then we will have fulfilled all the aspects that all this history has. And at this moment, we just know just a little part of it, because we did not live as a humanity, as a total humanity as yet. And I'm looking forward for the moment, and this will happen in the future, where everybody will be able to go to space and feel what it means to be outside of the Earth, looking at Earth from far away, and flying space like a bird without gravity. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I think that's great that that you're pointing out that there are so many different types of knowing and of experiencing, and that all of these are part of the human experience, and all are necessary for us to really grasp that incredible step of leaving Earth and living on, let's say, the ISS. But yeah, I wanted to just go back to, before I ask my questions, that I wanted to say that, yeah, I really think this is an amazing body of work, an incredible body of work that portrays for the first time as a meditation, I feel, the architecture of the space station, not just as a list of inventory, but as a kind of deeper thought about what that means to be in this vessel, and for that to be your lifeboat, so to speak. I want to say thank you to Leah, because we can stay on the call. Leah has to run soon. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here and contributing your thoughts. And I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it was so wonderful seeing all of the familiar faces. And thank you, Paolo and Roland, for sharing so much fantastic insider info. I'm really fascinated that you can make phone calls from the space station. That's my big thing. I still will be wrapping my head around that for a while. But thank you so much, and have a fantastic day. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
By the way, Paolo, I have to say, your description of the what we lose by not bringing people with other backgrounds, perspectives, trainings, life experiences, and that doesn't, it's not just necessarily occupational or philosophical, but it could also be from countries that have not been able to send people to space and all that other stuff. But the actual inspiration of the International Space Station Archaeological Project was the 2015 call for new astronaut candidates by NASA, which explicitly excluded social scientists. and when I saw that, I thought, how can we show them what they're missing out on? And so that's exactly. And not only did it say social scientists, in parentheses it said anthropologists, geographers, and archaeologists. They absolutely did not want applications from people with those backgrounds. It's like, we have so much we can talk about for you. We can reveal things for you. Anyway, but that was where that came from. It was exactly that idea that we have ideas and perspectives, and that we can bring something useful to what you're trying to do. So,
I concur. Absolutely concur.
And I should say, we're in the process of we've made a proposal to the Center for Advancement of Science and Space to get crew members on ISS to do an archaeological survey of the interior of the space station for us, hopefully before 2024 or 2028, whenever habitation stops there ultimately. But
well, if they start carrying tourists, I think that would be a perfect task for quote unquote a tourist qualified enough to do this, because I think that will probably work like that way.
Somebody who has the $60 million that we don't have to go.
Yeah.
I wanted to quickly say thank you to Julie as well. They have to go. I think you have another meeting. So thank you so much for participating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Discussion.
It was so great to meet both Roland and Paolo. Thank you so much for having me, Marcus, and nice to see you, Justin.
Our pleasure.
Hi, Julie. So the next assignment for your students is send them to space and have them take some pictures.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm formulating the project. Yep. Great. All right.
Thanks,
take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Paolo and Roland, for your time and answering our questions, and for this really interesting discussion that I'm sure gave us and hopefully the viewers a lot of insight into the show that we have up, and we'll help them experience it on our Scalar page. So thank you so much, and until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
See you in space.
Thank you.